And when I looked at a promotion, and I looked at 4 or 5 promotions over the course of 15, 20 years to get to the level of my VP, his day to day was not what I wanted. As we transition here a little bit to what we want the community to be, the leaving your 9 to 5 community, I think I've used some analogies to kind of explain it for myself or define it for myself. So, just quickly for everyone's context, leaving your 9 to 5 is for me a year ago. Not, being this competitive individual my whole life, playing sports my whole life, getting through college, always having some championship or some goal to shoot for was me all the way up through college, and also being rewarded based on my performance and having quick feedback loops with that, to where in a game you do really well, you're instantly rewarded, and having something to wake up every single day to shoot for. When I left college and my season ended in COVID after 18 games, and spent the next 2 years being pretty lost and not waking up every day, not having a goal to shoot for, not having the championship to strive for. I was working in corporate America, 9 to 5, very hierarchical structure. And some would say, hey, like a promotion could be your thing. Hey, making it to VP could be your long-term goal. And I looked at that, and that was not an appealing proposition for me, being a competitive individual. I want my work to pay off for something at the end, like a championship. I want it to mean something that is super valuable for me at the end of the day.
What is it about the corporate structure? I mean, for some that might mean, I've got plenty of friends who they talk about those promotions. They talk about following the track. That's a championship, but I'm curious, why is that not a championship for you?
That's a great point. I think separating that out of that wasn't it for me. Agreed. It can be it for some people. Some people love the corporate 9 to 5. We were talking to my girlfriend Lex, your sister. She likes her job at Disney. She likes having the structure and having a promotion to shoot for. But for me, I've always wanted freedom at the top of my list, I think, of being able to work when I want to work, how much I want to work, and be able to be rewarded for how I perform in those instances. And when I looked at a promotion for me in my old job, and I looked at 4 or 5 promotions over the course of 15, 20 years to get to the level of my VP, his job, his day to day was not what I wanted. And I remember the exact moment of looking at his calendar and not seeing a free minute on his calendar for something like the next 2 weeks, Monday through Friday. And I also would get emails from him, or emails looping him in on stuff on the weekends. And I know he was making a good amount of money, but I know that the higher he moved up in that company, the less time he had to actually do what he wanted to do. And maybe he wanted to work for that company. Maybe that's what he wanted to do. But for me, I didn't want to get promoted, get more responsibility, and spend more time working for somebody else, making somebody else richer, when the payoff just wasn't there for me. And he might have been making high 6 figures, probably wasn't making 7 figures a year. But if he would have said he was making like $1 million a year, maybe I would have believed it. But it took him 20 years to get there. And he, every day for those 20 years, was 9 to 5, Monday through Friday, or 8 to 6, jam-packed schedule. And that was not something that I could wake up every day excited to go achieve.
I think something that people will overlook in a contrast between being in the corporate world and being in charge of, it's not always necessarily being the business owner, but whatever the opposite of the corporate world is, whatever that may be, being in a startup. I mean, there's a lot of manifestations of it. When you're in the corporate world, you're always asking permission for things. You're asking permission, even in cases where you do well. A promotion, if you think about it, you have to ask permission to be rewarded. You may pretend to take it to an extreme. You could do your job perfectly, you still have to ask permission to be rewarded for doing great. If you are an entrepreneur, business owner, you do great, you don't ask permission to get your valuation, your company to be worth more revenue. You go out, you go door to door, you get all those sales, you get that profit. It's organic. You're organically and proportionally rewarded for doing great. Complete parallel side of things. You may do great at your job, as I've said, run the numbers, whatever your position is, and you still have to look toward the person above you. May I be compensated proportionally? It's a little bit less organic.
Agreed. And there is always a ceiling on that, because I could work 20 hours or 80 hours a week, and I would still get paid the exact same month after month after month until I got to the mid-year or end-of-year reviews.
Yep.
But even at that time, I was only going to move up one level, no matter how well I performed. It was corporate America, very structured, hierarchical.
So give me the contrast then.
Almost-
How would that be any different if I break away from my 9 to 5, I put in my 20 hours, my 60 hours, my 80 hours, my 100 hours. What's the contrast? How does
Yep.
that situation play out differently?
So for me today now in my sales job that I love, and that's one of the goals of leaving 9 to 5, is to show people that you can go from where I was 9 to 5, no championship, no pay based on your performance, to where I'm at now in my tech sales, software sales job. If I go out next week and I work 80 hours a week and I crush it, I'm going to make more money because I make money on each sale that comes from that. And the more I sell, the more money I make right away. And so that is a much more enticing proposition for me, because I can go make more money tomorrow.
Mm-hmm.
I don't have to wait till mid-year or end of year and somebody else's opinion of my work over the past 6 months to a year.
Exactly.
Which, who the heck remembers what you did 6 months ago? Honestly, you can have notes, but it's really hard to make a judgment on somebody and say, oh, you actually deserve to be at manager level or director level. Like, that's why it's so hierarchical. That's why it was so step change.
Exactly. And there's too much. I think for me personally, I'm currently in a 9 to 5, and there's too much subjectivity as far as how am I doing. If you're in sales, it's pretty clear. It's objective how well you're doing. You do the same performance. You are waiting on someone's opinion. Subjective. Did they forget about how well I did 3 quarters ago? Did they forget how many those late nights I might have had to put in based on what the company required early on in the year? Now they've forgotten, but maybe one of my colleagues more recently put in those same amount of hours, those late hours, that hard work more recently, and all of a sudden, subjectively, it appears like they did more or were more successful. I found myself in that position countless times. I shouldn't have to question, and I think that's kind of one of the reasons I don't like a 9 to 5. I want to put in the work, and I don't want it to matter if somebody remembers or doesn't remember. Did I do it or not? Yes or no?
And you want to have really clear understanding, at least for me, I wanted to have a really clear understanding of what it was going to take for me to get to the next level. Whereas my corporate 9 to 5, I could work on any number of projects at any given time, but what is the actual impact of my project on the business? Am I working on the low level stuff that I could crush it, dominate it, and it doesn't mean that much for the business? Or how do I get involved in the things that really matter at the business?
Yeah.
In sales, you bring in revenue. It's very clear. How much revenue did you bring in for the company last month, last quarter, whatever it is? And that's what you are compensated.
So